I'm Jeremy Wechsler. I'm directing Tragedy, a Tragedy. I'm actually out of a set of remarkable coincidences, I've actually directed his entire canon in Chicago. So I started with Tom Paine, Based on Nothing, which I produced and directed about 3 years ago, and then directed The Flu Season, and now Tragedy, Tragedy, which is interesting, his first play. So I've actually worked backwards through it, and I really, I think the world of Will's writing. He's just one of those unique playwriting voices that can only be writing for the stage. He's not going to all of a sudden turn around and do a sitcom. It's not his voice, it's not his personality, it's not anything of that. And I think by virtue of that, he's without question one of the most important playwrights working in America at the moment, because he is entirely focused on this. And he has such a unique voice and poetry and take on the way the theatrical experience is constructed. One of the cool things is I really think he kind of writes a little bit from an outsider's perspective. He didn't grow up in the theater. He wasn't, hasn't been in play since he was 6 or anything. He actually wasn't that interested in the theater until he wrote. He read a play, and he liked the way it looked on the page and the way it felt reading it, and then he started going to see them. But he decided, I think maybe I'd like to write a play for the writing of it, not for the performing of it. And he got very interested in this relationship of the audience and the spectator to the action. And so all of his plays, I don't know any other playwright who is half as conscious of the presence of an audience watching the play as it's happening as he is. So it's one of the things that makes his plays, so uniquely theatrical. There's not going to be a television version of the Tragedy, a Tragedy anytime soon, because he takes a lot of care about the specific relationship of the specific audience to the action, which I think is kind of amazing. The other things I think that are great about working on Will's writing is his sense of comedy and language together. So he writes this very kind of wonderful, subtle, intricately crafted dialogue where these sentences themselves are these kind of individual poetic lines, but when said simply and directly, they don't sound like poetry, but they have this kind of unique rhythm and surprise, and they kind of pounce up on the audience as the actors are talking, and all of a sudden you realize, my God, that was hilarious, and it's gone like. That's one reason I think that he's going to be, or at least one reason. That's like the 30th reason now. I think he's going to, really be a kind of enduring voice for the American theater. In Tragedy, a Tragedy, it's a play in which the characters are almost never talking with each other in the same location, but it's not a monologue play. When we started rehearsing, I was looking at things, I was like, this is a piece of cake, I can rehearse them all individually, and you cannot rehearse them individually in any way. It's completely impossible. So it's a monologue play, but it's a monologue play of specifically people speaking to each other in these newscast-length bursts of communication back and forth across the medium of this camera. So it all kind of gets sent out to the audience and reflected back in. So I don't actually know another play that's actually structured like that at all. There's plenty of plays of kind of a series of interlocking monologues, but in that case they are speaking, not to one another. They're speaking to the audience, to unseen, inquisitors or whatever it is, but they're never speaking to each other, but unable to see one another. So on the one hand, there's something, these characters are all in these isolated little worlds as they're speaking to their individual cameras, but they're all speaking, not just to us, but specifically to the rest of them. And so it does have a kind of, interesting bridge between the kind of monologue play and a kind of traditional dialogic experience. Well, there's a couple interesting things. One, since I now know, 3 of his plays by heart after all this work, and because this play was the first one he did, there's some fascinating ideas and themes and even phrases that he later kind of fully developed. For instance, tonight I was listening, and there is a line, that Michael says, you know the feeling when it's flu season and you feel you're going to get sick, but you're not sick yet. Of course, the play he wrote after this was called The Flu Season, and it is about the experience where you enter into a love affair, and your belief that it will be short term. It will not last long. No matter how long the love affair is, it will end. And that moment, I kind of called it a kind of pre-deja vu, where you believe you are anticipating the experience of the loss, even as you are having the experience of enjoying the love affair. And that kind of informed us as we were trying to unpack that line and understand what he's talking about. His inclusion of the audience as this active participant in the plays. No, I mean, we're not going to, it's not like, where are you from? Hey, come check it out. Chicago, that's a great place. There's no audience participation, but the audience is a kind of absolutely central character, as this kind of mediating force in why all of these characters are speaking. They are speaking to the audience and to each other. And there's a real sense of the relationship in all of his plays between the spectator and the viewed. Tom Paine, based on Nothing, does a lot of this, where it's all about the kind of expectations that we bring to the theater, when we come to the theater, what we expect to see, what actually happens. And the characters in Tom Paine is aware of all these theatrical conventions and keeps saying, no, cut it out. That's not going to happen here. Forget it. That's not what this is. So there's a lot of kind of this toying with the audience back and forth. In Flu Season, not Flu Season, in Tragedy in particular, one of the things that is interesting is because it is a newscast. We are brought into the world of these newscasts. These four people reporting on this the event of night, this tragedy, in which, at least in the U.S., we can be sure that at least 2,800 people will not make it till the morning. Because that's how many people die every night. And I was interested in this idea of when we watch the news, it's on the one hand this kind of very isolated experience. We sit, we turn on the TV, we've got our popcorn or whatever we're watching, and yet we are in this community. They don't just do the news one-on-one. It is meant to be a mass consumed entertainment or infotainment. Used to just be informative, but those days are gone. And so there's a sense of joining in, participating in the community, particularly I think with the local news, that we're all here watching this thing happening in our town, in our place. So one of the things that kind of the jumping off points for the design was to look at that relationship very specifically between the audience and the action as typified in this play. So we separated the audience into little rooms. So the idea is that you are watching this play, yes, with the community, but you're not packed in. It's not about the experience of feeling all the breathing and reacting people around you. It is isolated. You are in this world where you are the only people who are experiencing this. Even as you can hear other people reacting and laughing and what have you, you can't see them, you can't feel them, and that sense of isolation and butted up against community is, I think, kind of the heart of one of the things he's talking about in this play. So that was one of the things that we tried to bring out. Well, the biggest kind of informative thing about this particular production is I'd never worked with red tape, and I'd never actually even seen the space before I came in. So it was really about this particular room that you all perform in. You have this kind of amazingly odd, enormous cavern of a space. And so part of everything about this production kind of came out of my first tour of the space. I actually didn't even know when we started that you guys specifically work in non-traditional audience seatings or configurations or what have you. So then I showed up with design, and everyone was really excited. They're like, "This is just like us." I was like, "Really? I had no idea." So I think that the biggest thing about Red Tape is being in this particular space and environment and having this kind of freedom to create this new relationship from the audience space to the action that we don't get in a lot of traditional theater spaces, and really not in a lot of non-traditional theater spaces, which tend to be a lot smaller. I mean, there's a lot of space and expanse here that we can really fill up, which I think is really cool, and definitely the thing that is Red Tape can bring to the table that no other theater in town really can.